Well, look who wandered into the studio today. By golly, it's Greg Winter.
How
Greg?
about that?
I know, it's
Hey.
a special day here.
You lost?
They told me the bus stopped out front, so.
Okay. Just waiting for the next
Yeah,
one.
just
So we
waiting.
got him for a few minutes, so that's cool. We'll start off with a little stream of consciousness. Well, speaking of transportation, what was like the first car that you ever drove?
The first car I ever drove, or the first car
Or
I
you
ever
like
owned?
owned, yeah.
First car I ever owned was a 1963 Chevrolet Bel Air.
Nice.
I bought it from my uncle who ran a car dealership in my hometown, and he sort of burst my bubble because when he sold it to me, he said, "Greg, you just bought yourself an expense." I go, "Wow, thanks, Uncle Harold, don't tell me that. This is supposed to be my liberation."
And how did it go for you with
It was
the?
fine.
Oh,
You
that's
know,
good.
it broke down prerequisite amount of times, and I bought an expense. So,
Yes, I had a '69 Squareback.
Yeah, see?
And so my mom saw it on the side of the road one day as she's driving. She, immediately thought I was in the hospital somewhere. Mark, are you okay? So what was your first job that you ever had?
Oh, my first job I ever had was working at Al's Grocery.
Wow.
On Highway 75 in Laverne, Minnesota. Yeah. I think I was a freshman in high school or something like that. Well, I'd actually worked for my dad at his gas station before that, but that was working for my dad.
Doesn't really count.
That was indentured servitude, but it wasn't really a job.
My house, my rules.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Did you ever have like a childhood actress crush?
Oh no, but I had a childhood school teacher crush. I kind of thought she was a Hollywood movie star. And my second grade teacher, Miss Sider. Oh my word.
She sounds good looking.
Oh, she was.
Miss Cider.
That was probably like her first job out of college. She's like 22 and I'm 7. I'm thinking, oh, she could love me.
And how long have you guys been married?
Right. We've been married now 50 years.
That's amazing. That's so
Exactly.
good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what's something that everybody seems to be totally into that you just go, what? I don't get it. What's happening?
There's a lot. There's a lot.
Get out the list.
There's just start checking them
Just
off.
roll out this. He's got to scroll.
Yeah, I think social media might be one of those things, but I acquiesce. I have an Instagram. I follow along. So
You're keeping up with the Joneses.
I'm trying.
That's
I'm,
good.
I'm trying to.
Slowly but surely.
I'm trying to find a whole bunch of really valuable stuff there.
So, how has the agency and production company relationship changed? Or has it changed, maybe is a better question.
I think expectations have changed on the part of the agencies. I think that, I think because clients sort of put the screws on them a little harder now about how much they're spending, that I think that just runs downhill, right? It finally ends up in the lap of the production company. But I just think it's become it's become different in the sense that a lot of agencies now will also just have their own internal production companies. They'll just have people that work for them that go out and do this stuff. Sometimes it's required, sometimes you'll get a client who has a lot of pretty high volume needs in terms of stuff that they have to process through social media, stuff like that, it becomes a once or twice a week thing, and it's just better for them to have somebody internally that they can turn to and say, could you go do this? And so in that sense, it's changed a lot. But we kind of went through that back in the 80s too, when agencies had their own internal production companies. I shot a job for Seiko watches in the late 80s, early 90s out in New York, working for an internal ad agency production company. They'd seen my work and called me up and had me come out to DP the job. So it's not a new thing. But it seems like it's different now. It just seems like there's more of that stuff going on. And I think it's this idea that, how hard could it be? Right? I mean, I think there's always been this idea with agencies that the production companies are making a boatload of money. Just look at the price of that commercial we just paid for. And yet they don't recognize that there's like 90% of that money is passed through. It's just going from this hand to these vendors over here. So it's a little bit of a misunderstanding as to what the production company actually does. But it's an interesting time. It's I think agencies are having a hard time finding their own footing too in this newer age where it seems like marketing is more available to them from a lot of different places, not just through the agency. Because the history of ad agencies in Minneapolis, St. Paul is a really, really interesting, varied, and very good reputation in terms of the kind of work that got done here. And now what's interesting is that there are piles of small little agencies that are all made up of creatives that used to work at the big houses and either left or decided, you know, that the place was downsizing and they get rid of the expensive guys on top because they're old anyway. They were 35. It's time for them to leave. So you get this whole, you know, so you get this movement in the amount of people that are working, and what happens there is that then they open up their own little shops, and there's a lot of little shops that are doing probably some pretty good work for the size that they are in town. So that whole landscape has changed too. There was never the amount of agencies in town, you know, in the 90s, early 2000s that there are now. There's lots of small ones.
So if you were speaking to someone who worked, and I know it depends on their position to a degree, but say at a higher up at an agency, and you were going to give them some advice on how to approach having an internal production team versus working with an external one, what sort of advice would you give to them?
No, I mean, I don't know that I'd give them any advice. I mean, that issue is, what happens there is that the internal team will always take the most heat, because what finally eventually happens is the creatives say, oh, do we have to use Bob and Jim again? I mean, can't we go outside? Because, gee, it seems like all they do, it's always the same stuff, blah, 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 blah. And it's not fair to the internal guys either, because the internal people, I'm sure, are trying to put their best foot forward and trying to do their best work and all that, but they're not getting the best work either. You know, they're not getting the really great ideas, because that's going to somebody else outside. So I don't know that I could really advise them. I guess I would just say that, you know, in the end, you sort of have to sort of feel like, well, if I was that person in that position, how would I want them to treat me? And in that case, then I think if you're going to have an internal production company, then you should want it to be the best thing you can have. You should want it to be populated with really good people that are going to do the work at a high caliber, so that your clients can look back on their work and point to it and be proud of it, right? The biggest issue I have now with clients is I just want to look at them and say, so do you like how you're being represented out there? Because I can't pick you out of a barrel of a whole bunch of other people, and you must be happy with it because you paid for it. So, you know, it's an interesting problem. In the end, the client has to be satisfied with their message getting out there in a way that they think is being effective. And I don't know. You know.
Is there a way to maybe educate, to help raise the expectations and make people more intentional and accountable to?
I mean, there might be, Mark. I don't know. I think in the end, the biggest issue right now is still just price. It's price and availability, right? I mean, you know, my brother-in-law's got a camera. Why can't he just shoot it? Well, your brother-in-law could shoot it, but it's like when somebody looks at a Jackson Pollock painting, and they go, well, my kid could have painted that. And, you know, respectively, sir, no, your kid couldn't have painted it, because there's intentionality behind that, which your kid doesn't have. So there's the issue. It's intentionality. It's being focused on what it is you're trying to say and how you're going to say it. You know, I teach an occasional class on Intro to Film Studies, and I teach the class at University of Northwestern on cinematography and lighting. And in both those cases, we always have the conversation about intentionality and about visual literacy. You know, you need to know what images mean, and you need to know how marketers are talking to you, how they're speaking to you, what kind of an impression they're trying to make. Because it's a language just like English. It's understandable. We all know that certain shots mean certain things in movies, and, you know, so you should want to be aware of that. You should want to know how that language functions in your understanding of the message.
So who are some people that are having that intentionality and are doing cinematography and visual literacy right?
Oh, I don't know. I think there's a lot of them. I mean, I just think there's a couple of combinations of directors, cinematographers out there that have been doing really good work for a long time. I mean, you look at the Coens and Roger Deakins, you look at Inarritu and Lubezki. You know, there's these teams of people out there that are really, really good at that kind of messaging. The point is that it has to be something, though, that's intentional. So you look at Todd Haynes and Eddie Lockman, and these guys, you know, Far From Heaven is this unbelievable remaking of a Douglas Sirk film, and the sort of the rethinking of how does melodrama play into how we understand the really difficult issues in society in the 50s, and how does it happen now? So, you know, how do we understand race and homosexuality and the role of women and all this kind of stuff? And, you know, and then how do you put that into a motion picture? You know, Carol is a very, very interesting movie. It's about this relationship between this older woman and this younger woman. And by the time you get to the end of that movie, you cannot name more than maybe 2 men in the whole thing, because the director and the cinematographer intentionally frame men out of the story. They literally show them only the backs of them, or the side view, or a little piece of them in the frame, so that there's only a couple of characters in that film that actually have a name that are men. And it's intentional, because it's a story about these women. It's not about them. It's not about those characters there. You know, it's fascinating to me. I mean, Spielberg in E.T., another one. You know, Cool Hand Luke. I mean, these are really, really intentional, interesting films, but they don't just pull them out of their pocket on the day, right? This is all a lot of conversation and a lot of intentionality on the part of the director and the cinematographer just working together. Yeah, that's the best. That's the best it gets.
We've been talking with Greg Winter, and thanks for joining us on Sound.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, you bet.